especially because they have been kind enough to come in on their birthdays. One day late for Dr. Madhubuti, and happy birthday today, Professor Gilyard. Thank you. We do have a little special surprise coming after the show. So, as you all probably know, Busboys and Poets is a space that exists to very intentionally bring racial and cultural connections together to uplift voices like the Black, Brown, and Jewish writers and poets featured in this book. So this is a very important text for us. We're really excited to get to have this discussion, and thank you all for being here. Again, a few quick announcements before we get started. Servers will be coming around through the night to take your order. Feel free to eat, drink, whichever, or both. And another reminder, we do have a heater/AC that comes on kind of loud. Just be braced for that. And I wanted to remind you that there will be a Q&A and book signing after the event. So don't rush out. There'll be opportunities to chat more with our fantastic editors. Some quick intros. Professor Madhubuti is a best-selling poet, author, and educator, widely regarded as one of the architects of the Black arts movement. He is the founder and publisher of Chicago's Third World Press, the oldest independent Black book publishing company in the world. Especially impressive because he just turned, I think, like 30. Then Keith Gilyard is a professor of English and African American Studies at Penn State University, and he's worked on numerous books as both an author and an editor. He's also the recipient of 2 American Book Awards. So without further ado, I will let these two get started. Let's give another round of applause.
Good evening, man. It's great to be here with my brother Haki and talk about the work that's been completed. Just say at the outset that we have to check Haki's sleep patterns because when he's not sleeping well, stuff happens. You know, and it's gonna be productive though. It's gonna be good. I remember I was in Chicago once. I was in a hotel room. The phone rang about 7:15 in the morning. And I'm like, he's calling in, man. Somebody in the hotel, fire or something's going on. It was Haki. He was like, how you gonna be in the struggle, man, if you can't get up in the morning? Like it's 6:45. He'll call me anytime of day or night. But the thing was, after the events on October 7th, 2023, and the events that began on the 8th of October, he really had insomnia. You know? And so this whole book really came out of insomnia. He really couldn't sleep. You know? It was bothering him. He was talking about it, and I can't even sleep. What's just happened with the babies, all the babies, the children. And he just really couldn't sleep. And that's really the genesis. That's the genesis of the project, right? We could have called it Haki's Insomnia, but you wouldn't know what it was about, right? So it ended up being, and they are our children too, was the original title. But it ended up being Forgotten Children. So that's really the origin. And I'll have to talk more about that because he's really the architect. I'm an architect of this project. And I love to talk about that. That's the genesis of it. I love to say that. By way of introduction, too, because it's really an honor anytime I can sit up, you know, on the platform with Haki Madhubuti. He's a national treasure. But this Madhubuti holiday, your president, national treasure. And anytime we get to see him out and about, talk about the work he has done, and then the work that he is doing, as well as the work that he will do. It's a great occasion for us. So I just wanted to put that out there. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here and to reconnect with Andy. We met in New York at the Schaumburg Center for Black Culture, Black Culture, on Sonia Sanchez's 90th birthday. And he traveled there with James Early, a good friend of mine also, and introduced me to him. And I'm talking about the book. We had a different title then, and he invited me to the Busboys and Poets. And obviously I'm going to say yes, but I had to tell him that if I'm coming to D.C., it would be the grand launching of the book, but I have to go to Sankofa first because I helped build Sankofa with my brother and sisters. He didn't miss a beat. There was no negative energy. He said, of course. And so we went to Sankofa last night and we're here tonight. And I really appreciate it. So I just got him to commit to publishing a book with us, which will be, hopefully, the history of Busboys and Quivers. And I say this with a certain level of humbleness, and what you've done is good. And we'll be honored to publish the book. Now, he has a new book coming out leading up to Busboys and Quivers in March. It will be launched, maybe here, I'm not sure if it will be launched, but probably here. And Ethelbert Miller, who is a good friend and fine poet and writer, is going to, I think he goes to Dutch. But Ethelbert Miller is a Washington, D.C. statue. I met him when he was a student at Howard University, and I was a poet at the time, and I could see the genius in this young man, and he had a chair. It was good to see him out there. Oh, he's still here. Raise your hand, let people know who you are. Okay. Ethelbert Miller. So we're here tonight for the inaugural introduction to our book with Dr. Keith Gilyard. Keith is brilliant. He's a distinguished professor at Penn State, and we've been knowing each other for many years because he's like one of the few serious academic scholars who's a fine poet. And we published one of his books about a year and a half ago. We've got a new book of his poetry coming out hopefully within the next month or 2 months, but it's probably we're going to publish his anthology on Malcolm X. It turns to 100 years. That'll be out. So, but Keith is actually the chairman of the board of directors of Third World Press. Due to his work and other board members, we're still alive after 58 years. And it's been a journey. And to start this new journey for GAZA'S children here at Busboys and Quivers, and of course last night at Sankofa. And I turned 83, and he turned 73 tonight, today. Must be some meaning behind it. I knew I was born on the same day as W.B. Du Bois. I don't know what they do.
I found out yesterday it was Peter Bailey.
Peter Bailey did?
Yeah.
So A. Peter Bailey, that's interesting. A. Peter Bailey is one of the living authorities on L.R. Julie GAZA'S Haki. He's done a couple books. So that's I love black people so much that whatever I do for and with black people is never sacrifice. It's always a commitment. And so I love black people, and I love all children. It doesn't matter what culture, doesn't matter what religion, doesn't matter what race, all children. And so when our precious children were hit on the 7th of October, it affected me also, but it affected me in a way in which I could not respond. And so I'm thinking about that. And then shortly after that, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, launched a full-blown attack, not against just Hamas, but against the people of Palestine. And that, but at the same time, I said, I cannot respond to that because there's too much involved, and I'm not an authority on that area, even though I've been to Palestine, I've been to Israel, I've been to the West Bank, I've been to Gaza. But I'm not an authority. But I am authority on the pain of children. Okay? And that when I began to look at it and read it and study the literature, and I said, we got to do something. So yes, I called Keith and I called Mark. Mark Lamont Hill would be here tonight, but he's ill. He came in against my wishes last night, and he had to go back. But he's under attack all the time. In fact, he does this upfront program for Al Jazeera, and they've had to hire bodyguards for him. That's how bad it's gotten. And so he actually, Mark, he doesn't actually ask me for permission for anything, but he actually, can I please go back and try to get some rest? I got to do this. I said, okay, go ahead, bro. I'll explain to people tomorrow when we go to Busboys. And so he's back on. But he's had to have his phone changed about 3 times, and et cetera, et cetera. So I called Mark because he did a 2-author book on Palestine with another Palestinian writer. And since among the 3 of us, he was really the leading authority. And I asked him, would he lead in terms of our editing a book, not just for black writers and brown writers, but for Jewish writers and poets, so we all speak out. We could not have done the book without Jewish writers being involved, because the last thing that we wanted to be accused of was being anti-Semitic, because that's a canard that's gone through the black community for many, many years. And I became really aware of it reading James Baldwin back in the 60s. So what was the title of that essay, Baldwin's essay? Anyway, it's in one of his major books of collected essays. So I grew up No, it's about the Jewish merchants from Harlem, right? Because I had experienced the same kind of problems in Chicago. I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas. I left about 1 year old, as John Albert Killens would say, we moved up south. And mentioning John Albert Killens, Keith Gilyard is the leading authority on the life and work of the great writer, John Albert Killens, Keith Gilyard, Dr. Keith Gilyard. So having that experience with Jewish, well, most certainly business people, not with the children, not with families. You have one skewed interpretation. But as you grow and you travel, and I've had the opportunity to travel widely, 4 continents, Africa many times, Europe, been to Israel, Gaza, West Bank. And I remember when I went into Israel, I came into Israel as a guest of the original Hebrew Israelites, who had at that time stationed there. But when I went into Israel, I was held at the airport for 4 hours. You know, asking all these questions, but that's neither here nor there. And so when Gaza happened, it had a deep effect on all of us. Okay. And so when I called Mark to see if he would co-edit, he said yes. And when I talked to Keith, who is actually one of the chief editors in terms of reading these essays, he's a hell of a scholar and editor. He said yes, and the book is out. So I'm just going to just say a couple of more words, and we got one of our, we may have others here, but we know we got one of our contributors here, Jonathan T. Love. But the dedication of the book, then I will say something about how I feel about all of this. We dedicated the book to Edward Said, you know, the great scholar, Columbia University. The great scholar and still with us, who's considered one of the major writers on many different subjects, mostly political as well as the Middle East, Noam Chomsky. We dedicated to Mahmoud Darwish, who has been considered the voice of Gaza, poet. And I came across, when I went to Israel, I saw them out and got his books and things like that. Rashida Tlaib, representative. She said she's taken a lot of weight, a lot of heat, and she's still hanging on. In fact, of the three representatives I mentioned, she was the only one that was not defeated. The great poet Adrienne Rich. I don't know if you all are familiar with her or not, but you need to read her work. Cori Bush, Representative Cori Bush. She was defeated. AIPAC helped defeat her. They put over $10 million in her race in Missouri and wiped her out. June Jordan. June Jordan was very conscious and a world writer. Very fine poet, had a large following, but she was very conscious about what was going on in Palestine and Israel also. I learned from her work. And she was a very, very good friend of our brother. Jamal Bowman, used to be Representative Bowman. Well, AIPAC put about $13 million into his race, wiped him out. They were all very conscious about what was going on in Israel, Palestine. And then, of course, the great writer, Angela Davis. She really can't say anything about Angela other than that she has represented us and the world in a very positive way. And she's writing a forward for your book. Okay. You can't do anything better than that. But I've been in her corner all of her life, and stuff that she didn't even know about. But Angela Davis. Norman Finkelstein, Dr. Norman Finkelstein. I met him. I was on the faculty at DePaul University, where he taught briefly himself. And he had a fight with DePaul University because they didn't want to give him tenure because of his position on Gaza. He's written, I know at least one definitive text on Gaza. I think it's 2 now. Norman Finkelstein. And of course, the great Cornel West. Cornel West has been out front about what's happening in Palestine for so many years. It cost him his position at Harvard, and maybe at Princeton also, I'm not certain. But he's a good friend and a supporter of Third World Press. And then finally, Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges, all of his books, for the most part, have been very strong anti-imperialist, anti-racist. He's done a book with another Palestinian illustrator. Okay. Then always my books are dedicated to Gwendolyn Brooks. Fine woman poet, family member of mine. And then of course, to the Palestinian people who are suffering in ways which are unimaginable. And just to make sure that you realize that we have Alice Walker has 3 poems in it, the great Alice Walker. And so the book is in 3 sections. The first section, essays, the middle section, poetry, and the last section, essays, and we have an epilogue where we have serious writers also. I think that in the addendum, we have the great historian Robert E. G. Kelly has an essay in here too. But I want my co-editor, Dr. Keith Gilyard, to say a few words, but I'll just say something about my essay is there to accurately name the horror of Gaza, of genocide. And I'm posturing, positioning the genocide of black people, the ongoing genocide of black people in the Western world, and the genocide of the Gazan children, not ever forgetting or excusing the Holocaust. I want to make clear that it cannot be positioned against each other, around each other. The Holocaust was unique in itself in terms of the horror, really the attempt to actually wipe a people off the earth. That's the Holocaust that we can never forget. So in my piece, I opened up with 2 poems. I'm not going to read the poem, though, but one of the major poems from our church, Claude McKay, 1889 to 1948, which is the year of the Nakba. Palestinians call it the catastrophe. And then I open up with the poem, If I Must Die, by Refus Khalif, 1979 to 2023. And so he was killed, he was murdered, he was wiped off the earth. So this is the final poem by the Palestinian poet and academic known as the Voice of Gaza, who was killed in an Israeli strike December the 7th, 2023. And so it was critical and crucial for me as a poet. I'm primarily a poet, and everything that I've contributed to our lives has been a result of my being a poet. Building Third World Press and other institutions that we have in Chicago has come about in part because I'm a poet. I'm not a leader. I'm not asking you to follow me anywhere. I'm not taking credit for anything that I've not done myself. But as a poet, it became clear to me as I looked for my glasses. I'm blind also. To just share something with you quickly. After the 2 poems I write, yes, it is often the poets who bring clarity, who warn us, forcing us to think beyond the possibilities of one's own life or death. The great passage where shiploads after shiploads of Europeans disposed into the ocean the bodies of both dead and alive enslaved Africans during their forced voyage to the West. And as I referenced Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett and The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. The European trade in African women, men, and yes, babies, numbered in the tens of millions. And now, during a contemporary genocide, the Palestinian poet, the voice of Gaza, Refute, a direct descendant of the magnificent unofficial poet laureate of Palestine, Mahmoud Darwish, had failed to escape the torrential bombs from the Israeli Defense Force in the aftermath of the shocking number and human violations committed on October 7, 2023, by Hamas, the fighting branch among the 2.3 million Gazan people imprisoned within the 25.5 miles open concentration camp. So I give some history there, but my history is to basically point out that the babies who are being killed there every day, they're our babies also. They're our children also. And what we try to do with this anthology and the people who are in here is to give some attention to it, some livelihood to it, and to make sure that we not ever forget the Holocaust, we don't forget what's happening in Gaza. Keith?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, unlike Haki, I grew up in New York, as Ethelbert did. He's from up in the Bronx. I started out in Harlem, and then I was over the bridge in Queens. So mostly my entire public school education was among Jews, predominantly Jewish students. A lot of people don't know that, but I was the only African American in my class for 8 straight years in predominantly Jewish neighborhoods, Jewish schools. And so I also visited those homes, and so my awareness of the whole situation that we might call it Palestinian or Israeli situation, that really began in childhood because I was visiting, because kids are kids, and so we're not observing those racial barriers that came later. And so I actually was in a lot of their homes, and I heard them talk about Israel and about Jews, and the thing that I understood and learned early was that there was contention in the Jewish community, even about Israel. And I was shown an article once that there was a survey done in the 40s, right on the eve of the creation of the state of Israel, where they surveyed American Jews about their opinion on Israel as an independent state. And it was almost 50-50, but a slight majority of the people surveyed were against it. Right? And you wouldn't think that decades later when you see a solid pro-Jewish bloc in America claim anti-Semitism if you're against the state of Israel. When in fact, the majority population in the 40s, the American Jewish population in the 40s, did not see Israel as the homeland. You see. So I learned this stuff as a kid. And so the Palestinian question, the Israeli question has always been something that has been around me, and I've always been in touch with it to a certain extent. And that was really instructive to me as I think back on the question. And then on the question of anti-Semitism, I did a panel with a scholar a couple of years ago, and he said that we should retire the term anti-Semitism. He said because after 1945, it can't describe anything accurately or in detail, or it can't do justice to what went on during the Holocaust, as Haki mentioned. Matter of fact, I think I gave you that article. But actually, there's a whole book out about that now. And so, because if we call everything anti-Semitism, then we're calling everything like the Holocaust, and it's really false equivalence. And so, that understanding began early. And then I remember being a junior high school student during the '67 conflict, and some of the students in my class, they ran out of the school, and they said, they're bombing us, they're bombing us. And a couple of other students were like, who is the us? And I'm thinking like, who is the us? And so the media by then, from the late 40s to the mid 60s, the public opinion had really shifted. And so that the support, the unbridled support for Israel as a settler colony, which is what it is, and the support for the imperial project, which is what it is, that has shifted dramatically over the course of 20 years. And so even now, if you say anything that's anti-Zionist, which Zionism is a political project, right? It's not a religion, and it's not a people. It's a political project. If you say anything against Zionism, you're automatically called anti-Semitic in the U.S. And it's funny because Semites include Arabs as well, but I mean, that's another linguistic question. But that's really the understanding. And so for me to get a call about being involved in a project like this, which I'd already actually written about it. I wrote a blog on October 14th, 2023, which is exactly 1 week after the horrific incident occurred in Israel. And I talked about this question of separating the notion of Zionism and separating that from the notion of Jewishness, because they're not the same thing, right? And the other point I wanted to make in that blog was all lives, especially all lives of children, are the same, right? I remember watching a show, I think it was a Donahue show back in the day, and again, I think that might have been, no, that was after the 73. There's always been some war going on, and they had a cleric, a Jewish cleric on, and he said that, I'll never forget this, he said the fingernail of a Jew is worth 100 million Arabs. I said, what? You know, and the fingernail of a Jew is worth 100 million Arabs. He said that on television, and I never forgot it. And so, again, you see the imbalance, and you see the imbalance in the American media as to how they cover. And one of the things Haki did in the book, which I was a little, you know, I did a little double take on it, but I was with it, is when he called out the administration for inviting Netanyahu to speak before Congress. And he named names. And so you can imagine the names that were named. People said, Haki, you gonna do that? He said, I have to do it. Probably one of them sleepless nights. He said, I have to do it. I have to name the president, the vice president. I got to call them by name. So the American media coverage is so slanted in favor of an imperial settler colonial project. But then it's no surprise, because America's settler colonial project is just older. And so one of the differences is that people who were alive during the Nakba, you know, they're as old as the state of Israel, if not older. So this is recent history for them, whereas if we talk about 1775 or 1619 or whatever, that's more ancient, and none of those people are walking around. But that should not distract from the core issue. You're talking about an imperial project, and you're talking about genocide and the oppression of a people from the river to the sea. You know, it's not just Gaza, where you had 2 million. You also had 3 million on the West Bank. So you're talking about 5 million Palestinians in a colonized Palestine. That's what you're talking about. So for me to get on board with a project like this, that was a no-brainer. You know, it's what I've been thinking about on one level or another, you know, ever since childhood, really. You know, in Ethelbert, like I said, in New York City, boy, like Ethelbert. So, and that essay that they're referring to, that Baldwin wrote, Baldwin made this argument that Harlem and the black community of Harlem was not anti-Jewish. They were responding to white racism, and what they saw Jews as white, you see, and that's what they responded to, not against the exploitative store owner on the corner, not because he was Jewish, but because they saw him as a white man. So it's another linguistic issue we can get into. But if you distinguish between Jews and whites, you can see what Baldwin was conflating it, and that's really what he was talking about. He wasn't talking about the Harlem community was anti-Semitic, not at all. And I would argue they're not. I know I got aunts and friends, you know, and a grandmother-in-law that you say something bad about some Jewish people, you got to fight right there. And my daughters know this. Don't talk about Jews in front of Booby, you know. And so the whole idea of anti-Semitism being rampant, you know, in the Afro-American community is really suspect to begin with. And so that's my New York City on the ground observation. And like I said, I grew up among them from 9 to 3, not after 3, but from 9 to 3 I grew up among them.
Well, I'm going to, we have a writer here who's in the book who is Jewish. I'm going to introduce him in a minute. My first contact with the Jewish community came in the year of 1962. I was a young soldier stationed at Fort Sheridan, Illinois. And I'm reading all this black literature and getting in fights with these white Neanderthals about what blackness mean, and well, I'm not going to allow you to call me on my name and stuff like that. So I was about to get put out of the army with a dishonorable discharge. And I was a pretty good chess player. In fact, I was the teenager champion chess player of Detroit, Michigan. And I was stationed at that time at Arlington Heights, Illinois, and the lieutenant who was head of the base was a West Pointer. And he thought he could play chess until he came up against me. And so I would beat him every time, and so he had this respect for me. He didn't like me, but he had this respect for me, but I was getting in trouble all the time. It's almost every day you go in, you got to fight somebody. So they probably give me a dishonorable discharge. So I said, I don't care, go ahead, just go ahead and do it. He said, no, you don't want that. He said, let me work this out. So he worked it out and got me transferred to Fort Sheridan to work with a black sergeant who was a cook for a major general. And the major general was a family member of Sears and Roebuck. And so I got over there to work with him, and the general let me live in this basement so I wouldn't have to keep going back to base dealing with these Neanderthals. And so again, I'm reading, and there's nobody to talk to. It's nobody to talk to. So there's an ad in the Chicago Defender, which was a Daily Defender at that time, for the Ebony Museum of Negro History. And they're looking for volunteers and would you come visit? And so I went in one Saturday, I knocked on the door, 3806 South Michigan Avenue, and this white man answered the door, and I turned around to leave. He said, young man, come on in, this is the museum. Of course, it's somebody's home, it's his home, Margaret Burroughs and Charlie Burroughs' home. And I said, I was here to see, Margaret Burroughs. I saw her name referenced in the ad. He said, well, come on back. I'll introduce you to Margaret Burroughs. I said, okay, thank you. He said, I'm Eugene Feldman. And he said, I've been here for, the years when we founded the museum. He's credited as one of the founders of the DuSable Museum. It was the Ebony Museum of Negro History at that time. And he's Jewish, okay? So he takes me back to meet Margaret Burroughs. She's working on a linoleum cut, which I didn't know what was at that time. She's a world-class artist. And I'm staring at her, and she looks up to me and says, what are you looking at, boy? She's the first black woman I ever saw with a natural. This is 1962, okay? I said, I need to talk to somebody about, black history and such and such. Go upstairs and talk to my husband. So he's upstairs working, and he's sitting down, writing. And I walk in, and I thought some water and stuff like that. He said, come on in. You want something to drink? I said, I'll take some water. He said, no, this is vodka. Okay. So he had been partially raised in the USSR, spoke Russian fluently. So he kind of began to take me under the wings, as well as Margaret Burroughs. Then I get to really know Eugene Feldman. And Eugene Feldman is a historian who basically writes about black people. He got run out of the South, ended up at the museum. And he's the one who introduced me to Israel and the Palestinian people and so forth. That was 1962, all right? And so I just want to give that brief history that it started for me back in 1962. I'm a little bit older than Keith. And as a result of that, it kind of stayed with me until we got the book out. One of the persons I depended upon to try to help technically around some of this was a writer by the name of Jonathan T. Love. Jonathan is a retired newspaper man. He's a writer. And as far as I know, long of his adult life, he wrote for newspapers across the country. And I think he ended up writing for a newspaper in Texas. But we published a book by Jonathan T. Love along Martin Luther King Way. He came to see me about 25 years ago. Correct me when I'm wrong when you come up, Jonathan. But I think it was around 25 years. And he was writing this book, and he asked me for a blurb. Now, I just found this out last night. He asked me for a blurb, and I wrote a damn essay, all right? And so he put it in the book as a foreword. And we've been friends ever since. And when the book went out of print, we were able to pick the book up because Jonathan did some legwork and got the permission from Random House, I think it was Random House, for us to publish the book without charging us an arm and a leg. And Jonathan has donated his royalties to Third World Press. So he was one of the first Jewish men that I went to get an essay for this book. So Jonathan, why don't you come up and introduce yourself, please. She got it.
Hi. That was pretty accurate, what he said. I mean, I'm here because of Haki. We met on Election Day 2000. It was the Bush-Gore election, and I was traveling around the country. Sorry, let me just... I was traveling with a photographer, Mike Falco, along Martin Luther King streets across the country for what was a newspaper series and then a book about this being Black America's Main Street. And Haki was among his other things, was professor at Chicago State, which was on Martin Luther King Way in Chicago. And even before I got there, I had just been hearing about this guy in Jackson, Mississippi, and in Oakland and other places. And, you know, the sort of thesis of the book was that there is such a place as Black America, and this is its main street. It all, you know, there's kings everywhere, like about 1,000 of them. And what he, you know, when I went to Third World Press and met with him, it was like, this is the proof that what I'm doing is real, because most, you know, white people don't know who Haki Madhubuti is. But if you travel in Black America, his fingerprints, his footprints, his influence is everywhere. So it really is a separate place with its own interrelationships and, you know, only a couple of degrees of separation, whether you're, you know, wherever you are. So when I wrote the book, as Haki said, and I sent it to him before it was published, and I don't know that I asked for anything, but I think that, you know, I was hoping maybe he would give me a quote that I could put on the back of the book. And without ever talking, he sent me this beautiful foreword, or what became the foreword. And I said last night when we were talking about this, my son's here, and when he was, I don't know, 12 at the time, and when he read the foreword, he said, "Now that's good writing." And it really was, because it understood what I was doing and explained it in ways that I didn't even fully, you know, have the confidence to do. So that was just, one of the great days of my life when I got that. And we've kept in touch, mostly because he would reach out to me every so often just to see how I was doing. Because, I was involved in the newspaper industry for some good years, and then for a long period that was pretty grim in terms of the fate of papers. And then after I left newspapers, I came back because my son had first one and now two kids, so I had grandchildren here, and moved back to DC. And when I got in touch with Haki on his birthday, after I returned, he told me he wanted to do a paperback edition of the book. And it was just the idea that it would go from Random House to a black press was really beautiful to me. And I really appreciated that. He also, and this leads to why I'm here today, I think Keith mentioned, Haki reads everything, but he's especially well-read about Jews and the history of the Jews and Jewish people, and he's got a keen interest in it. And, I told him about my family. I grew up in a Jewish socialist family with a huge network, my parents, of people who they grew up with their whole lives and maintain contact with, who are really just beautiful people who really cared about the world. And so he wanted me to write a memoir about that growing up and how it led me to do what I did in journalism and writing about race. And in the course of doing that, with Haki's encouragement, my daughter is now living in Berlin, and my family was from, among other places, Poland, and that was sort of the most accessible place that any of my grandparents were from. So I thought, as part of sort of understanding who I am and my background, it was to sort of go to Białystok, which is a city in Poland that was one of the most Jewish places on earth when my grandfather lived there, and now there's, I think, 1 or 2 Jews in Białystok. And Poland is where most of the Jews who killed in the Holocaust were from. My family left after a series of pogroms earlier in the 20th century, so they were gone by then. But the timing of the trip was either horrible or fortuitous, because I left Dulles on October 7th, 2023, as the news was breaking about the Hamas attack. And I then found myself for 3 weeks in first Berlin, and then in Białystok, and then in a small town where my grandfather was born, which also was predominantly Jewish, and now there are no Jews. And then Treblinka, which was the death camp where almost 1 million Jews were killed. And this was all happening simultaneous with, it was evident from, as horrible as the Hamas attack was, it was evident from the next day that Israel was going to try to make Gaza uninhabitable. It was just going to destroy Gaza and kill as many people as possible. And it was just a horrible juxtaposition. And, we went to, with my daughter, we went to Treblinka, which is sort of not far from where my grandfather was born. And you get off the train and you have to get a cab to go to Treblinka. And there was one taxi there, and the guy was asleep in the back seat, and my daughter woke him up. And we got in the cab, and Aria, my daughter, kind of nudges me because there's like this vision, like in the air in front of me, and it's of a book cover of Hitler giving what I guess we could now call the Elon Musk salute. And it was weird because, and it said Jacques Hitler, and it turned out it was a book about how Hitler could have won the war. The cab driver had put it on the dashboard, and it was reflecting off the dash. And it's like you're looking, okay, so we're being driven by this guy to Treblinka. We get to Treblinka, and we're the only ones there. I mean, there's nobody else there. And then we realize in order to get back to the train, we have to call the same one taxi driver to bring us back to the train. And, I mean, he didn't say anything, but he had moved the book so that it was even more prominently displayed between the console between the front seats. So the trip was like that. The next day we're back on a train and we're heading to Warsaw. And I won't go into great detail, but I ended up getting, assaulted by this old guy who didn't like the conversation we were having and didn't like the looks of me and wanted me to get off the train at what would have been the Treblinka stop. So we go to the museum in Warsaw, which is a magnificent, it's the Poland Museum, and a couple hours in, I see this photograph on the wall, which looks exactly like my daughter Aria as a teenager. And it's a Jewish Lithuanian girl who I find out later was, there was a mass death. They took the 4,000 Jews, men, women, and children, to the Jewish cemetery and killed them. And then an hour later, I see this photo that looks exactly like me at the age of 9. I mean, the expression, everything. And next to me is someone who looks exactly like my sister's son, Stephen. And I learned more later that this is in the few minutes between their arrival, disembarking the train at the woods around Treblinka, and their death. And it just overwhelmed me because this was happening as the death toll in Gaza was mounting day by day. And it was just impossible to bear the fact that that a Jewish state could be doing that as if they didn't understand what the Holocaust meant or what had happened. So, I was honored to be able to contribute to this. And I think the things are we're in such an awful state, but I mean, we're now in a place where if you, when I mentioned Musk or Trump, when Musk did his Hitler salute, he was defended by Netanyahu and by the head of the Anti-Defamation League, because he's a friend of Israel, a defender of Israel, so therefore he's okay. And we're finding an alliance between these sort of far-right political figures here and in Germany and in other parts of the world with the Israeli government. And these are not people, I mean, I don't know how a Jew can look at these people and think that they care about Jews or that they worry about Jewish survival. This is just a sort of lethal alliance that's bad for everybody, but it's also bad for the Jews. So, thank you.
Thank you. As you could, as you could hear Jonathan speaking, you can kind of hear the pain in his voice, that the human condition and that what we have to experience as human beings in this world, I don't know if you know this or not, but this imitation of a man who's the president of this country, very evil, basically forcing over 500,000 Haitians out the country by September of this year, took away their protective custody. And for any person who would vote for him, most certainly black or Jew, it's just an embarrassment. And one of the things I've learned in my short tenure on this earth, I taught at Howard for 8 years at Howard University. And I commuted between Chicago and DC every week to help build the institutions that we have in Chicago. And I would always tell students that there are several ways you can learn. One way is just listening to each other, and most certainly listening to people who you consider the other. The second also is reading, unstopped reading and studying. And the third is travel. Travel to unfamiliar spaces, travel to out of your comfort zone, and listen. And then, of course, get back among your own people and try to do that which is right, just, correct, and good with historical consciousness, with a sense of integrity. And always try to work as hard as you can, because we're working against supreme evil, most certainly in this country. And so the book, the monies that we earn from the book, 20% will go to a Palestinian organization. I think 10% would just go for the payment of the book. Then we have the stores and other outlets that sell the book, they have to get their money so they can stay alive. But we're not taking any, none of the writers were paid, all the editors. So we're donating our time and energy. And for you to buy the book, you're basically helping Palestinian children. And the essay that Jonathan was referencing in the book is Lamentation, How Can a Jew Not Weep for the Children of Gaza? And just before we move to the table of content, I quote from Toni Morrison, essay. And Toni Morrison writes, quote, "This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilization healed. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it is important not to ignore its pain, it is also critical to refuse to succumb to the malevolence, like failure, chaos, certain information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art." And so we tried in our own minor way to put on the table our thoughts on this very important matter. And before we go into questions, I just want to see if Keith wants to say anything else on his birthday.
This is a thing everyone comes out, and I noticed that this event is part of a series of events at Busboys and Poets. I was glad to see that. You have documentary, you have other writers and whatnot. So the fact that it's getting this week-long, at least, attention is a very good thing. But I just want to end on the points that we wanted to stress. And it's kind of a point that Jonathan alludes to, is that the children of Gaza obviously are unsafe. So many have been killed. But this is not making life any safer for the children of Israel. Children of Israel are not any safer in this world that can bomb Gaza back into the 17th century. So I just want to make that point, and that this is an imperial project, and we should not forget that with all the reminiscences and personal reflections and whatnot. Let's not forget the crass political aim at the heart of this. This is a project in settler colonialism. It's an imperial project. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Is Brian here? No, Brian didn't make it. So at this time, if you have questions, we'll be glad to try to entertain the questions.
Yep, you can just raise your hand and I'll come pass you the mic. See someone right here.
Thanks. Jessica Graham here. It's not so much a question as it is a comment. So my background is I was a former State Department official. I worked for the Carter Center many, many years before that. Actually, I worked with him at the time that his book came out on Peace, Not Apartheid, which was making news rounds because it was very vulgar, if you will, at that time to talk about this. And I think President Carter's comment at that time, when he looked at his community and who's fundraising him, he had a lot of powerful Jewish wealthy donors. So he looked at that and said, you know, this discussion isn't happening around the table and it needs to be happening because it was non-existent in the mainstream media, which I think we're all learning now is a lot of fake news these days. But while you had sleepless nights, I did too. And while you wrote a book that I'm really looking forward to reading and gifting to my community, I started a nonprofit focused on supporting children in global insecurity. So in particular, looking at wars and looking at the Gazan children and supporting them with prosthetics. So that's something we've been working on over the last year. And this issue didn't start on October 7th. I think that's really critical as well. And so I just applaud you for your efforts and your work in speaking to this issue because I think we talked about how funding is driving a lot of the politics and the powers that be that are the kind of donors for that. We talked about the censorship as well and the silencing by just labeling anything that's not Zionist supportive or Jewish supportive being an anti-Semite. So I appreciate the work you guys are doing, and I think all children are important and need to be protected, and really applaud those efforts. So thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just say one more.
I mentioned that Jimmy Carter book actually at the end of this book. And you saw, 14 board members resigned, I think, from the Carter Center after you published that book. Yeah. So we talked about that stuff. Thank you.
Of course, Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter were both very good people, fundamentally. It's hard not to be good if you're a farmer, and producing food and so forth. But we did reference them in my essay as well in the book.
How you all doing? I'm a young attorney from the area, and I just want to applaud the publishing company because I'm a new author, and I've been thinking about ways for young authors to get opportunities to write about issues they care about, but maybe not feel comfortable writing a whole book about, like Palestine. I'm learning about the issue. Do I feel comfortable enough writing a whole book? Probably not, but I submit a poem or a chapter or something like that to a project like this. I think that's a really cool way to get reps in about an issue you care about, and again, the money could just go to orgs like Palestine and stuff like that. So I just want to commend you for a very creative thought process. I like that a lot. And hopefully I can maybe chime in on one of your topics one day.
Any other questions? Right here.
I'd like to ask Jonathan to come back and join and to have a discussion amongst the three of you about how you see this unfolding, because it's a very complex, nuanced space. And so what is it that needs to occur, if you will? What's your vision for what it means to move forward? On the one hand, respecting.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
What?
Of the microphone, so I can.
Yeah, I'm gonna finish my comment.
I've asked Andy to sit up here with us because his background is germane and very important in terms of the discussion. And
So let me just,
he brings a lot of wisdom to where we are today as a founder and owner and director, whatever his title is here at Busboys and Poets, to sit with us and talk.
so I just want to lay out some sense, as I naively understand it, about the complexity of the problem space. So you've got the interest and needs of the Israeli people, you got the interest and needs of the Palestinian people, you have the interest and needs of nation states in the area, you've got the distinctions between complex leadership in all of those nation states and the actual interests of the people, and they may not always, match up. And then you've got the internal sort of politics in the United States. And any path forward has to in some way conceptualize all these multiple, vested interest in moving forward. I think you all have made a powerful case of the ethics and the morality of what's going on. But to reach a solution, you got to deal with all these vested complex relationships.
Andy, since you haven't spoken yet.
Sure. I think it's the one thing that I think we should stop saying is that this is complicated, because it's the first thing that people say, and oftentimes it sort of shuts down the conversation because complicated sounds complicated and people don't want to really get into it. It's not very complicated. It's a group of people under a very brutal occupation that have had their land stolen from them, and they want it back, or they want some kind of reparation, some way to make it, to make them feel whole. Whenever we're talking about the conflict, everyone is concerned about Israel's security. Israel's security. No one ever talks about the Palestinian security. No one ever talks about their struggles, their aspirations, their desires. So I think that's really important. Somebody the other day says, do you think Israel should exist? And I said, that's a silly question. It's like, you ask, do I think Germany should exist, France should exist, the Congo should exist? It's not my place to say what should exist, but I do have something to say about the kind of country that it is. It should not have apartheid. It should not have a country that exists with an apartheid regime. And so yes, it should exist in any way, shape, or form. It needs to exist, but it shouldn't be at the expense of other human beings. So that's always been the kind of the underlying issue that oftentimes doesn't really get talked about. And like somebody said, people see this as a conflict that started on October 7th. So when you ever see like any kind of a discussion about this on television, is like, do you condemn Hamas, is the first question that gets asked. And at some point it becomes a little bit ridiculous. No one should ever condone the killing of babies or children or women or men or whoever. But that's not where it begins. So the next question is, do you condemn the occupation? Do you condemn the fact that there were over 7,000 Palestinians that have been killed before October 7th? Do you condemn the fact that there are 10,000 Palestinians wallowing away in prison, some of them children and women, that have no trials at all, that have been sitting in prison? So if you want to really start about the condemnation part, that's really an ongoing thing that needs to start way before October 7th. So I think there's a lot of there. Maybe that's what gets this sort of complicated. Just to give you an idea of how complicated it is, when we put out the notice for this event happening. And we've been doing these events right after October the 7th. We've been doing them for a long time. We do a lot of events around Israel or Palestine. We've had peace cafes where we bring Jews and Arabs together to have conversations. That's been ongoing since we opened. But since October 7th, we've really sort of ratcheted it up a little bit. And we started doing at least 2 or 3 events a week that deal with this particular topic. So a variety of conversations. So when we put it out, we put the name of this book. We showed the film yesterday, No Other Land, which is a first-hand account of a village in the West Bank that's been taken over by the Israeli military, demolishing homes and schools and everything else illegally, and leaving people to live in caves and in the woods, not the woods, they don't have woods there, but it's under rocks, basically. Anyway, so we put out that thing. Somebody wrote to me and they said, I read your email that came to my email, and it was very offensive, and it made me feel very unsafe. And she said that ever since October the 7th, I have felt unsafe coming into your restaurant as a Jewish woman. She says, I feel unsafe wearing a Star of David and coming into your restaurant. And then she proceeded to say that in that email, she was so offended that she felt that she wanted to report me to the Howard County Police Department in Columbia, Maryland, because we have a location there, to report me to the Howard County Police Department for a hate crime. I was like dumbfounded, you know. I thought, wow. So I wrote back to her. I don't usually write back to nutcases, but I wrote back to her. I said, you know, if I didn't know better, I think you're a nutcase, but can you tell me a little bit more about what you're asking here? Because what part of what you heard, or have you been to an event that made you feel so uncomfortable and unsafe? She didn't answer that. She said, her response was, I come to your restaurant all the time. I bring many of my black friends to your restaurant, and we always have a good time there. And it's like, okay, I got this. So, you know, we sort of ended that conversation there. But that was her response. The other one was, I got a second one, again, around this. I don't know what's happening this week. Something is really happening that's creating somebody said, you have on the wall saying, long live the Intifada. We have on one of the artists put up, long live the Intifada. And Intifada, for those of you that may not know or don't speak Arabic, means shaking off. It's basically not a revolution, but a uprising, much like what happened in Ferguson after the shooting of Michael Brown. That's called an Intifada. And Palestinians have been, you know, doing this on a regular basis. They're under occupation, really horrible situations. Every now and then they'll come out, throw rocks at the jeeps that go by, or the police, or the tanks, or whatever. Anyway, she said she interpreted Intifada as being wanting to kill Jews. And, you know, there's so much misinformation out there. It's become really ridiculous. And I feel like I have the responsibility to answer. Sometimes I don't answer these things, but I feel like I need to, because that misinformation continues to be perpetuated and passed on from one to another. So I explained to her something, and she apologized and wrote back to me and says, I love your restaurant, blah, blah, blah. You know, so, you know, it's just, sometimes just a little conversation can make a difference, I guess. But I wanted to ask you all about the idea of anti-Semitism, the word anti-Semitism. It's feeling like it's almost becoming a badge of courage, or a badge of honor to be named an anti-Semite these days, because it seems like it's lost its importance. It's like anything you say becomes thrown back at you as you're an anti-Semite, and at some point it weakens the language. You know, it takes away from its power. Are you getting that sense that if you're referred to as an anti-Semite, especially in this context of Gaza, as it's kind of lost its meaning?
Well, we speak to it. I speak to it in my essay around the loss of meaning. This is not the first time that I've written extensively on the relationship between blacks and Jews. I used to edit a magazine that we founded back in the 70s titled Black Books Bulletin, and we did about 20 years of it. And we did a special issue dedicated to the issue between blacks and Jews. So it hit me there at one level because in Chicago, the powers that be in the Jewish community pretty much came after me. And we responded, and it went away. I always say that it is our obligation and responsibility for men and women who seek and live by the acquisition of knowledge to speak out. Because what happens and what has happened in this country, and you see it globally, but mainly in this country, you have ignorant people talking about how ignorant other people are, all right? Who actually do not know, they speak headlines, you see, rather than go in depth and read and study. And so for me, I think those of us who have influence within the context of our community, it is our obligation. I don't have to ask permission for this. This is our obligation for those who are seeking truth and trying to do that which is good, just, correct, and right. I always say with a sense of history and integrity. If you got the voice, if you have the means to do it, put it out there. All right. That's why I went after him. That's why I asked you for a piece. That this is what we got to do. Otherwise, the enemies of the world will win, and we're not going to let that happen.
What is your sense about using the word anti-Semitism word, Jonathan?
Well, my uncle Gus lived to be 99, and I made a couple of trips down to see him when he was in his 90s. And he had, he didn't look great, but he had a photographic memory and total command. And he was very active as a socialist, but then also as a labor leader and a sort of labor intellectual. And I asked him about Israel and if he had supported the creation of the State of Israel. And he said, no, who needed another capitalist national state? And, at some point he sort of accepted it because where were the Jews going to go? But he wasn't really thrilled by it. And I just think that there's something about, he said that the job of the Jew was to be in the world as a sort of, to speak for justice and for people who are otherwise despised or hurt. And when you become a nation, it brings out some really bad things because you have the capacity to have power over everybody else. And it's, there's, I see, Peter Beinart, he's having a book thing tonight at Politics and Prose.
Yeah, he's going to be here actually next month.
Okay, because this is Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, A Reckoning. And Beinart was, I first knew of him, he was sort of a, very successful as a young journalist. He was the editor of the New Republic, and he was a liberal Zionist. And he's now kind of come full circle and has become a very eloquent critic of what's happening. But he points out in this book that the leaders of Hamas are people who, when they were 3 years old, saw their parents murdered. And that's how you end up with what happened on October 7th. And they have just seeded the future with people who are going to not be able to, who are going to have to seek their own revenge. And so you have a nation built on the horrors of the Holocaust and never letting that happen again, somehow perpetrating something that's not the same, but it's not all that different on another people who, you know, you said how Semites are, I mean, of all the world's people, the Palestinians and the Jews seem the most alike to me, and they're just sort of, their qualities, I mean, the Palestinians are among the most educated people in the world, considering their circumstance. And so it's, to me, it's just like unnatural that they have ended up in this situation. And I think I'm not really particularly hopeful, except the fact that there's, when he talks about a reckoning, I think that as a reporter, I, you know, like the fact that I sort of could go anywhere and do anything and talk about all these things without having to necessarily say what I thought. I mean, I liked that. And I would be pained by what was happening in Israel, but for the most part, I just was able to avoid it. And this made it unavoidable. And I think that there's an incredible, particularly among younger people, a complete change. And I don't think there's any going back. And I think, I don't know, but it's not as if I have I'm no more optimistic about that than I am right now about this country.
Keith, before you speak, let me just say this right quick. I would recommend that you read Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, a reckoning by Peter Barnett, who is Jewish, but he writes, and I think this is germane, there's no more intimate famine, you're talking about the famine that's coming now, the strategic affairs minister, Ron DeMeyer, told National Public Radio on March the 26th, that's of this year, of last year rather, that a complete lie and fabrication on April the 4th, Israeli Minister of Economics and Industry, Nair Bakar, appeared on MSNBC, asked whether he was, quote, concerned about the human suffering inside Gaza, end quote. Bakar simply ignored the question. Quote, we're concerned about the 134 hostages, he replied. You know, these girls and so forth. And what he's saying is also that the UNICEF people are saying that the depth of the horror surpasses our ability to describe it. It's deeper than any of us can describe, our ability to describe the horror that's going on now.
Yeah, I'm gonna speak directly to the question that Safisha posed. I think you threw us a hard case when you say what do we propose or what do we see about the national interests of a dozen nations, as well as the U.S.'s and Israel, and internal dynamics and all of that. I don't know enough to answer that question, right? In other words, I can't really propose or even really see clearly what's down the road. But what I do know is that the United States and Israel sign a memorandum of understanding every 10 years, right? And in that memorandum of understanding, the U.S. commits a certain amount of money to Israel. And the last memo, I think that was in the neighborhood of $31 billion over 10 years. So if anyone has a voice in terms of lobbying, working through a legislative process if possible, it seems to me that one of the first points you could address is that memorandum of understanding. Why do you commit $31 billion, and it probably will go up? Why do you commit $31 billion every decade? Every decade is renewable every 10 years. Why do you sign this memorandum of understanding to commit this vast number of funds to Israel, to a settler colonial state? So if you start creating an agenda items, you could put that on your agenda list. But what the entire solution is, given all the problematics that you put on the table, I ain't smart enough to answer that. I know that, but I know what I said, and I'm gonna leave it at that. I think we're losing our audience to it now.
I wanted to add one more thing. From my concern, I'm Arab and I'm Muslim, and I have a feeling for all human beings all over the world. I don't just think of Palestinians, I don't think of just Sudanese or Yemenis or Ukrainians or anything like that. I think of fellow humans. I'm an earthling first. But my biggest concern is right here in the United States, because that's home for me. And the impact that this Gaza situation is having on this country's democracy. That's the part that I think we should be most concerned about. Right now, there are legislation all over the country here called the IHRA, which conflates anyone who complains about Israel or says anything wrong to Israel can be termed anti-Semitic. So that shuts down any conversation. So this kind of conversation technically can be deemed illegal. And there's legislation that's being pursued throughout the country to do that. I think that's the part that worries me. The fact that 77% of Americans were asking for a ceasefire over a year ago, and yet the Democrats and Republicans overwhelmingly voted against it. People, as you mentioned, Haki, two major people, Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, lost their seats because they were asking for a ceasefire. That worries me because it shows me that we're not in a democracy. When 77% of people want something, and yet you can't get but a handful of Democrats even to speak up on it, it seems to me like somebody else is calling the shots. AIPAC spends billions, I mean millions and billions of dollars to impact the elections. They spend, what, how many for Cori? Something like
13 million.
Like $13 million on Cori Bush's campaign.
And 10 million for
more money on Jamal Bowman's campaign. And that to me is not a democracy. I mean, the voters should be able to speak up without having to be influenced by such enormous amounts of money that goes against it. So I think that's what we really should be worried about at this point, is what can we do here in the United States to hold on to this last, bastion of democracy that we believe we still have, although we're quickly slipping into a different state. I mean, an oligarchy, possibly. There's whiffs of fascism, I think we can all agree at some level, that are coming through with people like Musk and others sort of taking over government, telling employees to basically go fuck themselves. I mean, who does that? How is that okay? And yet there's no riots in the streets. Any other country in the world, if that was happening, people would be burning shit. But it's not happening here. We were talking in the car earlier about what brought us to this point right now, what brought Trump, what brought somebody like that. I really think Gaza was the blueprint that brought in a Trump. What happened during Gaza, the fact that there was a genocide taking place, the fact that students were getting arrested and being canceled and doxxed and thrown out of schools and sued and arrested for just speaking truth to power. This is what students have done for centuries. And yet they were being, really, really targeted. I think other students looked around and said, oh shit, this is not good. And I think a lot of people in this country realize that this is not a good thing and a good situation, but nobody really, not nobody, but a lot of people did not get on the street and make a scene and stop and put like brakes into this locomotive. So these people that are now in government were watching and saying, listen, if they can get away with genocide and the world isn't turning upside down here, we can get away with a lot of stuff. And I think they're really pushing further and further and further. And there's no real response at this point. Yeah, there's a little bit of demonstration in front of the Treasury Department. There's a little demonstration in front of the Department of Commerce. But it's not enough to really tip the scale at this point, and they keep getting bolder and bolder and bolder and more, frankly, more hideous in their approach. I don't know if anybody saw, but today Trump tweeted a SpongeBob SquarePants thing on his Twitter, just making like a list of what people are complaining about federal workers, making fun of federal workers. She says SpongeBob had a list of to do, and one of the things was show up to work for the first time, cry about Trump and Elon, cry some more, go have lunch, cry some more, go home. You know, it's a cartoon. The president, what an embarrassment. And yet he's still there. The press still stands around. The guy's naked as hell, but nobody wants to say he has no clothing. And you know, it just seems odd, really.
Well, one of us is fear, and that's what we always got to stand up to, is fear, to be pushed back against it. Jimmy Carter was not a Zionist. Joe Biden admitted that he was a Zionist. Right. And of course, Blinken was a Zionist. All right. That's the difference here. And I think that we always have to stand up to evil, wherever it is. And we're now being run by evil men, and now, of course, women too, in terms of the current administration. And all we can, otherwise, just go to sleep. Just go to sleep. And you'll wake up in these concentration camps that are contemplating around building to put in people they call migrants, all right? So it's our job to continue to speak, and I understand the fear. You know, I've been in situations where I feared for my own life many times, but you got to keep on going. You know, you got to keep on going. Yes, ma'am.
What is your strategy to fight through the fear that you feel? For everyone on the stage, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your poetry and your words. In your activism, how do you fight through the fear to continue to hope and demand better?
To be involved with other activists. That's it. So this is a safe space here. Sankofa, on the other side of town, is a safe space. And in safe spaces, you find other people fighting the same fear. All right. But you got to be active. And I've been an activist all my adult life. I started writing poetry as an activist. And I saw these small incremental advances as a result of this. Not to talk about my own life, but I had the same opportunities that other poets had to go with major publishers, to receive big checks. But I decided that that's not where I want to be. I changed my name from Donnell Lee, which I had real high capital, to Haki Madhubuti. And Haki Madhubuti means just or justice, and Madhubuti means precise, accurate, dependable, from the Kiswahili language. And so you got to, and growing up, you know, I lost my mother was murdered when I was 16 years old. So I've been on my own since I was 16. And so you gotta, you just cannot succumb to one's own personal fear. And the way to really deal with that is deal with other people who have fear in their hearts also, but we're coming up together. And so institutions that we built in Chicago, we built with other people. Third World Press came about as a result of dealing with other people and other writers and other poets. Not taking any money. Okay. We published in Midi Baraka. Baraka didn't take no money. We published Sonia Sanchez. Sonia Sanchez didn't take any money. We published in T-Love. He's not taking any money for his book. I've never taken a salary from Third World Press or from, you know, other institutions that we built. Because we gotta support each other. You see? Keith put more money into Third World Press than we ever received from us. Now that's why he became the chairman of the board, because he wanted to build independent black institutions. But you gotta interact with other brothers and sisters and people who are not outside of our own culture and outside of our own community. You gotta keep interacting with them. And that's the beautiful thing of teaching in the academy for over 42 years. Okay. Well, did I answer you? Thank you.
I mean, one of the reasons why we created a place like this is really for that purpose. Because there's nothing worse than being alone watching television. It's scary, right? You feel isolated and you feel vulnerable. But when you come and you see yesterday we had the filmmaker here. The filmmaker, his name is Basil, who lived in this little village in the West Bank, and he was confronted every single day with bulldozers and tanks and guns and police and military, and they continued resisting and resisting and resisting. We watched the film, and then he showed up. The guy was here in person, and he was sitting here, and it was a full room of people. And I'll tell you, like, if you don't know what courage looks like, that's what it looked like. That was courage. And I think in that moment, I think that courage was so contagious. Everyone in the room felt it and felt energized, like, I'm not doing enough. I need to go out there and do more. So I think being in community definitely makes a big difference. And I think, like Haki said, being intersectional, I think it's really important not to just focus on, this is my black issue, this is my climate issue, this is my women issue, it's all interconnected. And we have to understand that. We cannot fight this battle by being divided. You know, white supremacy thrives on that. White supremacy wants to make you divided, wants to make you in different silos, and wins every single time, because that's a natural way to kind of retreat to your own little group. But we have to fight that urge and really look for opportunities when we can intersect with others, find out what they're doing, and give us that wind in our sails that we go and do further.
Yep, I think with that we can wrap it up, end on a hopeful note. I think that's a good thing. I just want to remind you all one more time that For GAZA'S Children is here available for purchase. And I want to thank you all one more time for this amazing conversation, this important conversation. We got so much from it. We also want to celebrate you one more time, your birthdays. I know Keith's family has brought a cake for him, so we want to celebrate him for that. And also Busboys is providing a vegan cheesecake for Dr. Madhubuti. So we're really excited about that. And thank you all again, everyone listening, tuning in. The live stream, if you would like to get the book, you can email us to get a signed copy after the program. And we hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Keith. Happy birthday to you.
I mean,